We're back. Garza, Gaitan, and the game. We're analyzing play by play the game of politics. Daniel, today it's not via Zoom. Today we're in
Your
a
neck of the
studio.
woods.
Yeah, we're in Miami. So Daniel, you're in Miami.
Yeah.
What brings you to the city? What brings you to the neighborhood?
Yeah, well, just so you know, I used to live in Miami.
Okay,
so-
claro. So no, way before my days. Yo todavía en
Exactly.
PG County, Maryland.
But it's always nice to be back in Miami. Obviously, the people here are amazing. The culture is amazing. The city itself is just, I mean, what a thriving metropolis now. All of a sudden, right? You guys got one of the most beautiful skylines in the U.S. To be honest with you. So yeah, happy to be back in Miami.
And
but
then in
this is
politics,
for,
in politics, it's also a city that's seen such a shift, and it's been such a hub for great politicians.
Oh, yeah.
Rest in peace, Lincoln Diaz-Balart, que falleció this week. But he's someone who really helped sort of turn the tide. He's probably one of the first, I would say, Cuban American.
trailblazer. Yeah, and there's no doubt about it. Him and
You got to work with him?
you know, I interviewed him several times when I was actually working for Univision. And so I had the pleasure, of course, of interacting with him at events and galas in Washington, D.C. during my time at the White House as well. Came over to the White House for a couple of events with the president. So, I mean, just a great guy, obviously. Just incredible personality. Never stopped fighting for freedom, for his beloved Cuba. It's just one of these things where, you kind of hope that things would change dramatically during his lifetime, and they did not, right? And so that kind of leaves a little space in your heart.
Yeah.
That hurts.
He for sure leaves a legacy, and I think he also, I mean, he was one of the pioneers, because now his brother Mario Diaz-Balart is serving in Congress. Jose Diaz-Balart, tycoon in media. But I think he served alongside people like Ileana Ros-Lehtinen.
That's right.
Marco Rubio. I think they worked. Matter of fact, I might be confusing it with Mario. I think with Marco, they served in the state house in Florida. But either way, Lincoln, I think, was just one of those pioneers in that space. And then you look at just Miami in this last election, it was, I think, one of the first times that it fully went Republican, or the number of votes that they got, because historically Miami has been Democrat, even though you have a strong
It's
Cuban
been trending right for a while, and now you're right. It went majority red, to the point where I think they're starting to feel secure a bit,
Yeah.
And so and there's a danger in that too, right? Where you can start to take things for granted. The work has to continue, of mobilizing people, of driving your message and your ideas. But there's no question that even like the whole Cuban community itself was sort of the holdout for decades, within, that they were the ones that were center right when everybody else in the Latino community, especially in the West Coast, was leftist, right? So, they were stubborn about it. And now really, they're winning the game, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that it has begun to switch over, and Republicans in South Texas and other pockets of the country are now center right, Latinos. And so
100%.
in that sense, you have to, tip your hat to the tenacity of somebody like a Lincoln Diaz-Balart.
Yeah. Para su familia and for him, just people who worked very hard in this space. Well, look, going to this week, we're about 45, maybe 50 days into the Trump presidency. This week,
Which is, by the way, the reason I'm in Miami, to answer your question, is that I'm here because I'm going to be on Univision tonight, and we'll be talking about the joint address to Congress. And so, I'll be a panelist tonight, as an analyst. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, 100%. You asked and answered, like they say. But we're really looking at today. We're looking at a couple things. We're going to be looking at those first 45 to 50 days of the Trump administration. We're also going to be going a little bit more of a deep dive into Ukraine, the latest going on.
Yeah.
We saw last week this sort of combative back and forth in the Oval Office. We're also going to be looking at the conversation of tariffs and immigration. These two are kind of ligados. They kind of go hand in hand. There's a lot of news coming out of Mexico.
Trump y la chain bomb.
Y la chain bomb. Está tremendo la cosa.
Está tremendo la cosa.
So, I mean, there's so many ways to look at the first 45 days.
Yeah.
I would say it's one of the administrations that really hit the ground running. I mean, I think every president talks about their first 100 days. Every president talks about the first year. But I think this administration, like no other, has come out full force. That means that a lot of people that disagree with the president have a lot of criticisms, have a lot of things that they don't like and that they're just calling him out on. But what I want to ask you is, I think one of the ways that you can measure an elected official is by the promises they made during the campaign and if they're delivering on it. Because they were elected, and they were elected to deliver on those promises.
Sure.
How would you analyze those 45 days?
Well, I think in the sense that he's delivering on the promises that he's made, I think he's keeping those promises in the sense that right away we've seen an incredible mobilization to secure the border, to reduce the number of entries of folks who are showing up at the border without prior authorization. I mean, it has come down to what, 8,000 folks in a month. Is that what it was, or
Over 8,000. It was
Incredibly
160,000 in 2022. Yeah,
right? And so when you consider that, not too long ago, almost exactly a year ago, they had proposed a bill that presumably was bipartisan, but it was really a Democrat bill, and they even railed on Trump for this because presumably he stifled it, he quashed it, right? But what it promised was to allow up to 5,000 folks into the U.S. a day. Those folks who showed up at the border without prior authorization were going to be allowed into the country as long as they gave their name and a date of birth, I suppose. I've always felt that it's been a very weak verification system, and I think that's what put America most in danger. The inadequate vetting that was happening at the border. More than anything, that concerned me. Now, I'm a person who lives on the border in McAllen, Texas. And, I saw the folks, the droves of people that were coming in, overwhelming the system, overwhelming our institutions, our charitable institutions, hospitals, schools, all the public services. And yeah, that was a concern, because of, our ability to accommodate for so many folks so fast, right? But it was about security. Who was coming into the country and who had, bad intentions, right? To do us harm. And so what had happened under the Biden administration is we lost control of that. It was absolute chaos. And to Trump's credit, within 6 weeks, he has absolutely put a stranglehold on the border, and it's just, improving more and more.
Before you continue, one of the things that I'd be curious, we're only looking at 45 days, right? I think obviously the president has talked about working with Congress. How important will the rest of the year be in the scope of, because if most of what the president is doing now is through executive order.
Yeah, right.
Which means technically, if that's all that's done in 4 years, let's say Democrats happen to win, all of that can be undone. Almost anything. A lot of what Elon Musk is doing can be undone. All those employees can be rehired through executive orders. Those departments, most of them, my understanding is, can be sort of redone. Same thing with immigration. I think a lot of what's done through immigration to this point hasn't gone through Congress. So I do want to come back to some of the other things he's done in the first 45 days. But I also, on this point, what does the president need to do also forward-looking when it comes to working with Congress? Because if not, this can all be erased in 4 years.
No, there's no question about that. This is very much, I think, a solution that he's thought about. He had 4 years outside of office, 4 years of contemplating, what he would do if he'd get another opportunity to come in as the president of the United States on very specific areas, right? And this one on border security. And while he is steely focused on clamping down the border and bringing order back to the border, to your point, I feel that at some point he does need to pivot or at least expand his approach to a long-term solution, and that is going to involve Congress, right? To get involved, to reform the asylum process, the refugee process, our visa processes, H-1B visas, but more than anything, immigration reform itself, for the folks that live in the shadows. What we don't want, Wadi, is a two-tiered society, right? Where you have millions and millions of U.S. citizens who benefit from their citizenship, who enjoy in full daylight, what it means to be a citizen in a prosperous, free country. But then you have millions of folks who live in the shadows, millions of folks who are easily exploited, taken advantage of, who cannot come out into the daylight, and give their children the kind of life that they deserve, because they fear deportation, because they fear that somebody is gonna, turn them in. And the thing is, I think one of my predictions here is that if Trump just continues to be one-dimensional on immigrants, where all he's going to think about is enforcement without balancing the policy solutions to expand legal channels, this is an area where it could be exploited by the Democrats, right? Where he is going to be seen as somebody who's going to only use a heavy hand, crush anybody who doesn't fit into his model of what an American is, and I think it's a narrative that could easily be persuadable to a lot of people. But if he were to again balance his approach, he'd be a hero to a lot of Americans and a lot of Latinos, and he could continue the good vibes that he has with the Latino community.
Does the 5 million sort of visa, the gold visa?
Yeah.
I believe, does that give you hope? I know that that's a very narrow group, but it is legal immigration. It's people coming to contribute, to invest. Does that give you hope that there is going to be that more balance, for legal immigration down the line?
100%, because what it does is it begins to topple the first domino of what we can do towards legal immigration, towards dreamers, being that being resolved, right? Towards asylum, reform. And then the 12 to 15 to 20 million folks that are here, nobody knows, right? But there's no question, you got to start somewhere. And allow the world's millionaires and billionaires to come in and increase the prosperity by investing in this country, and adding value right away to the country. These are blue chip immigrants. Let's just face it, right? Because they come already with tremendous value. But there's no question also in our free market that immigrants also know where to fill the gaps, through spontaneous order. They know the skills that are needed, the kind of labor that is needed in the marketplace. Whether it's low-skilled labor, farm workers or landscapers or tarring hot roofs, or, folks in the crypto and digital space and, all these areas, right? We have there's an incredible diversity within the immigrant community, and they can all add value to America right away. But yeah, there's no question that I think this begins that process of expanding legal channels.
Yeah, do you, and kind of going back, that I think that's spot on that I do think long term that can be where a real impact is. And the president, even Elon Musk, has talked about the importance of legal immigration. Yes. Everything from you mentioned from the folks
big who work golden door.
A big golden door, right? They can talk the wall hasn't been talked about lately, but back when it was sort of this wall, but with a big golden door where we know who came in and out, where we can continue to invite those folks.
It was Trump that proposed 2 million spots for dreamers, green cards that 5 years later, of course, offers citizenship.
Yeah,
Trump did that. He proposed that. So yeah, there's precedent for Trump expanding legal channels.
Yeah, and let me ask you, going back to the original question on the first 45 days, I think another area that's been in the news a lot, and I think for some people, hasta lo agarró un poquito de sorpresa. It's a little bit surprising how rapid they started moving with Elon Musk and the what is it? The Department of Efficiency,
Government Efficiency.
There you go. Yeah. So what I find fascinating is I think a lot of people thought, usually in government they call a task force. They do a press conference of who's going to be part of the task force. Committee. Correct. Yeah, they announced a 90-day review.
Yeah.
They came in. Matter of fact, the Wall Street Journal had an article that I think prior to the inauguration, like 20 minutes before him being sworn in, there were already folks at OPM knocking on the door saying, we want access. And OPM had to be like, not yet, you got to wait. He hasn't been sworn in. And apparently the moment he was sworn in, they were able to get cleared, and they went in and they started. The first thing they set up, this is Wall Street Journal was reporting on this about 2 days ago. The first thing they set up is they said, is there a way that we can contact via email just everybody that works in the government? 2-point-something million employees are like, no, that doesn't exist. Every department is siloed. Everything is siloed. They said that's task number one. We need to talk to everyone. And they set up the system, and the first email was this test. And then since then, we've heard reports about now folks are being asked, hey, reply back with the 5 things you did this week. But there also have been a lot of folks who kind of criticize that. They said it's going too quick. You might miss stuff. Aid that goes to people in need across the country. What's your sentiment of everything that you've seen Donald Trump along with Elon Musk do in this space?
I think when it comes to Elon and the President Trump on the issue of Doge, I've had nothing but a smile on my face the whole time. And I think what happened to Wadi, in retrospect, is that during those 4 years that we were talking about where President Trump was Citizen Trump, he just had a lot of time to think about what he would do different. And during those 4 years that he was president, he understood better by the end how these institutions function, the role of each one of them, the personalities that they sort of control the levers of these machines of power, and how they allocate resources and money, how Congress moves to finance these institutions or doesn't, it's like, and who benefits from it, the whole cronyism and so he got a really clear picture that he didn't understand on day one of his first term. Day one of his second term, he was a different beast, right? He understood the ins and outs of government, and again, the personalities involved. And so what Elon brought to the table was, because he's from the private sector where he always has to show profit and have a lean, mean machine, that is efficient, that is innovative, that is changing all the time. And he brought in these young people. They don't know how government works. They just know how to make things more efficient, right? They make things anew, right? They establish their own criteria or their own machine or their architecture, right? As to how they're going to run something. And that's what they brought, right? It wasn't the same old government bureaucracy.
It wasn't bureaucrats working with bureaucrats on it.
Who understood government. Is like they don't know how government runs, and so they're reshaping the entire government structure, right? They're creating their own new architecture. And Elon was empowered to do this, right? And so when they get in, they find just a candy bag of all kinds of treats that were going out to the favored and the connected and the politically favored. And things that had been established that were financing, the meddling of governments, foreign governments, right? Of NGOs that were pushing agendas that nobody asked them to push. This woke agenda that was also being pushed on the people. And it exposed all of this. It sort of peeled back the curtain. It's like, look at everything that we're financing as taxpayers. Oh my God. Shut it down and shut it down now, right? It was the overwhelming reaction from a lot of people, and you're still getting that. And so, the more they uncover, it's just like the bigger my smile gets, because it's like everything you feared, it was being done 10x.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll be honest. I see a lot of this, and there's a part of me that's saying, like, when you move so quickly, what are you gonna miss? You're not gonna dot every I or cross every T. And a reporter did ask that to Elon, right? There was the example where he said something along the lines, I forget it was 5 million or 50 million. I want to say it was 50 million dollars were used to buy $50 million worth of condoms to go to Gaza. But it didn't go to Gaza. It went to, I'm forgetting which nation in Africa. So Elon recognized
to stop the Ebola virus.
Correct.
In some places, yeah,
correct.
That's important.
But he walked back to say, hey, there's some things that we're going to work out the details here. He said, I accidentally tweeted out Gaza or incorrectly, and I recognize it's not. He said, we are looking back at what we do. And he's like, we're very much open to feedback. And like, let's work together on this. So
I love that, right? That if this is so important, to certain parts of the world that is going to have impact, globally, then make your case. It's like, si el caballo es negro, enséñame los pelos en tu mano,
sí,
right? Que es negro, right? And so if it's that important, show me why and give me the merits of this program, as opposed to just willy-nilly financing anything and everything, especially this just crazy woke agenda that was.
Yeah. It's also, I want to say, when I look at the first 45 days of the president, we talked about Elon, but there are also folks in the cabinet I mean, these folks are like, they're part of the team. So the president does these executive orders that impact these different departments. They have to go in and work in this place. Look at Marco Rubio traveling. He had to go work with Panama, which I don't know if you just saw. Actually, I got an alert, again, Wall Street Journal, that BlackRock is securing a deal for these new ports that previously had Chinese contracts that are now working to secure the essentially American companies or businesses that are now going to handle this. There's a lot of people who criticize how he talked about the Panama Canal. And look, I'll be one that says this. I think the president, sometimes I think he does this on purpose, talks in a way that scares people and talks in a way that catches your attention and you're paying attention. And I think that many people kind of disagreed about how he talked about Panama and the approach and like, you're not even president yet. And like, these are our allies. But you know what? It put Panama in a place where they opened the doors for Rubio to come in to negotiate. And you're seeing the ripple effects of what's happening in this space. We're going to get into Ukraine down the line, but you got to give credit to the cabinet. Sean Duffy, Department of Transportation, with all these planes and everything going on. I mean, he stepped up as well. I think the cabinet itself is my point. These folks have also stepped in. FBI director, Department of Defense, Kristi Noem. I mean, you have all these names. RFK has come in. I mean, all these folks are coming in, and they're being these allies to the president in these departments that are going to have to implement a lot in that space. Are you, in your opinion, like, have you seen a cabinet team that has to deal with so much in so little time in the past?
Yeah, it's been a blur, right? You know, the pace has been frenetic, and so much that it still has the Democrats on their heels. And I think that they're just shocked by, you know, just daily occurrences, you know, as to how their precious government is being slashed, you know, is being cut down. You know, this Leviathan that they built, you know, is being undermined, right? And they had fine-tuned this machine to the point where it was financing their causes, and even their races, you know, their elections, you know, and not only in the U.S. but across the world. It turns out, you know, they were meddling in other elections. They were toppling governments or demonizing some candidates and enhancing others, diminishing some voices and enhancing other voices, and they were doing this at scale. And that's the scary part here, right? And, you know, the Democrats have been attacking Elon because he's an unelected oligarch, you know, is what they're saying, right? This billionaire who comes in, you know, and nobody elected him to do this. The only person in the entire federal government who's elected is the president. Everybody else, you know, the 60, 70,000 employees at the Department of Interior.
The executive branch.
You know, the 100,000 at the Department of Defense, probably even more. The 2 million, you know, federal employees, they're all paid by us, right, to serve us. None of them are elected, but yet, you know, you're comfortable with giving them the levers of the machine, of the, you know, government machine. So this false argument that somehow you have this unelected person, you know, who's now making choices, everybody's unelected. You know, and
Correct,
so just stop with that stupid game. You know, it's like,
for sure.
I just think it's just so silly, right? You know, but again, they're on their heels. They because of the pace of things and the blur that they're seeing. They just kind of lash out. You know, the AOCs of the world would just make stuff up and just try to demonize the other side to gain some kind of traction, right? And score some kind of, you know, political hit. You know, on the other side, who all of a sudden controls the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, you know, the executive. They're angry, right? And they want it back. They want their power back. The problem is they haven't learned the lesson, right? You know, they keep imposing an agenda on us that doesn't match with the priorities of the American people. And until you do that, you're going to be on the sidelines, you know, bitching about, you know, what Trump is up to. And so I'm, like I said, I think a lot of American people are satisfied with what Elon is doing and are thrilled that their tax dollars are now, you know, are being held to account. And they're not just, you know, being spent to undermine the power of America and our values.
They're seeing responsibility in this space. I want to talk a little bit about another topic where, like, it seems somewhat of a blur in the sense that there's so much going on and there's breaking news all the time, and it's the topic of Ukraine and Russia.
Yes.
I mean, just you look at last week the Oval Office, right? This is, to add a little bit of context, there's kind of two lanes going on, right? There's the U.S. and Trump specifically talking about sort of economic partnership when it comes to minerals, when it comes to making sure that like U.S. is kind of sort of seeing something in return for their investment or aid in this space, right? How can we partner economically? And then obviously there's the main subject, which is the war that's going on in this space. Zelensky comes to the United States, its greatest ally by far, not by words, but by actions, right? By here's funding, here's my understanding, arms as well. He comes to the U.S., he comes to the Oval Office, new president. There's no longer Joe Biden. Trump has been calling for the negotiation of peace, a peace agreement. The White House Oval Office meetings goes in the completely opposite direction. We've seen all the videos. I mean, what's your take about what happened? How would you analyze the entire situation so far?
I mean, look, I've been sort of taken aback by how, on the one hand, people criticize the power, the preponderant hegemony of the U.S. And when we take action, we're criticized. And then if we call for peace and try not to intervene, we're criticized, right? It doesn't matter what the U.S. does; we're going to get criticized. Mm-hmm. And so, in this case, you have Donald Trump, who, in 2015, Democrats were making the argument that if you vote for Donald Trump, he's going to unleash or bring about World War III. Mm-hmm. Because he's erratic, he's unstable, he's a blowhard. Oh my God, do you people realize, what you're doing? Gets elected. And mind you, Russia had attacked Georgia.
In 2014?
Back when?
Yeah.
2004.
Okay. 2014 was Crimea.
Then, mm-hmm. But nothing happened, right? They stood back, and then he attacks Crimea under Barack Obama. And they did nothing. And they stood back and they just watched it unfold. 4 years of Donald Trump, nothing happens. Mm-hmm. The man actually keeps things under control. We enter no new wars. Mm-hmm. In fact, he crushes ISIS. And then under Biden, Russia attacks the Ukraine. So it's like all the aggression that has taken place not under a Trump administration, but under the other previous administrations. Mm-hmm. And so now he's trying to avoid from the U.S. escalating to a point with Russia where we enter into a global third world war. And he's trying to stop it. So here, think about this, the irony of things. If we elect Donald Trump, he's going to start World War III. Now we need to stop him because we need to start World War III. We need to stop him from achieving peace. Mm-hmm. It's almost what they're saying. The Trump derangement syndrome is so crazy. It distorts people so much that here all the man is doing is forcing Russia and the Ukraine to come together to the table to negotiate for peace. Nope, we can't have that. We can't have peace. What's your end game? This continual war where people are dying, where buildings are being destroyed, where entire cities are being laid to waste. It's a war of attrition. Mm-hmm. like they've been saying, where more and more young people of the Ukraine are dying, and they're running out of soldiers. Mm-hmm. They're having to forcibly conscript soldiers into the army now, right? Like pull them out of their homes and their cars to recruit them into the army. And so the Ukraine is not going to win this war. It's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. And Trump sees that, but yet the rest of the world is just insanely persistent that we continue to fund a war that cannot be won.
And I think, we were talking about this earlier. When you say the world, it's actually like prime ministers, presidents of other countries. After the Zelensky Oval Office sort of encounter with Trump and J.D. Vance, there was like, we stand with Ukraine. We're with you with Ukraine. I mean, do you think, is this void? Is this posturing? Yeah. Like, how do you look at this and
It's
say
posturing,
what's
but
going on
I
here?
think that there's also a hidden desire by these European leaders that they wish they had more power, that they wish they had more wherewithal to actually stand up to Russia, but they don't, right? And it's the U.S. that has amassed through the free market system an arsenal that is the envy of the world. We spend more on defense than the rest of the world put together. Nobody is even comes close to the might of the U.S. when it comes to military, right? And so, if you don't have the U.S. on your side, you don't have leverage.
Yeah.
And Europe knows that now, and that's what's been exposed, I think, more than anything, Wadi. That you're right. After this debacle that was initiated by Zelensky, an amateur when it comes to diplomacy, to be honest with you, and he revealed himself as such, in this back and forth with Trump and J.D. Vance, who just slapped him around, to be honest with you. But you had these European leaders in unison. We're behind you, brother, or we support you, or
stand with
Sweden
you.
and France and England and all the countries of Europe and the rest of the world were expressing, their support for the Ukraine, but none of them would commit to more resources or money or arms or soldiers, much less soldiers, right? Warmer from the UK went as far as to say, we're going to send missiles and arms and soldiers if the U.S. will do it first. By the way,
Like, we support you,
in small
but we
letters.
still need the U.S. to step on it.
Well, again, it exposes how weak it is and how dependent they've become on America. America, it turns out, and everybody's finding this out, is the protector of the free world. America protects Canada, Mexico, the Caribbean,
the Monroe Doctrine.
Central America, the entire Western Hemisphere through the Monroe Doctrine, exactly. They protect Japan, Korea, and all of Europe, it turns out. They are NATO. America is NATO. They spend more in defense spending in Europe than all of Europe put together. And so for Zelensky to have come in and try to teach Trump a history lesson or how to treat Russia, I think was just so insanely stupid.
And I think days later we can see his regret.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been announced that he's coming back, and he's saying that he
hand.
regrets it,
Yeah.
and he's saying that he wants to negotiate peace, and he's coming back to the United States, not physically, but I'm saying he's coming back, saying we need, let's figure this out. Okay, let's negotiate.
So it turns out all that posturing by the European leaders didn't amount to jack squat.
Correct, but what's interesting in this space, and we talked about this earlier, is that kind of how we got here, right? Yeah. Part of the narrative that Trump has been leaning into is that while we can recognize that Russia shot the first shot, they started the war, but what did Ukraine do to kind of provoke this? But even deeper on that is that Ukraine,
there's a complicated history there too.
It's
right?
Years. I mean, I don't want to say centuries, but decades.
Well, it starts with World War II.
Decades ago.
Stalin and Churchill and Franklin or Harry Truman, under the Marshall Plan. Pretty much, they made an agreement. You're going to get X countries, which of course they split up South Korea, North Korea, and they split up a bunch of Asian countries, and then Europe, of course, famously East and West Germany. One side communist, one side capitalist, free market democracies. And of course, it turns out that these democracies were turned out to be superior in the sense that they generated prosperity and free people faster, right? And it was so clear to see what had happened. But everybody knows that there was a famous promise made in 1990 to George Bush by Gorbachev that there would be no expansion of NATO if the Iron Curtain fell. And they committed to that. And guess what? They expanded NATO, right? They brought in a lot of other countries, Austria and Poland and the Balkans and whatever. And so you started to corner Russia up to their border. And that matters because, of course, the U.S. at one point had put missiles across the Polish border. So there were short-range missiles that could reach Russia really fast. And, of course, that spooked the hell out of Russia. I'm not taking Russia's side. I'm just
Yeah,
trying to,
you're giving the context of
yeah,
it.
I'm giving you context because if I'm Russia and I see Europe is now crowding me, I need to push back, right? And that's exactly what they did, right?
Yeah.
By attacking Georgia and the Crimea and now the Ukraine is basically saying, no, you will respect this agreement, and you will, we don't want you up against our borders. And so, they felt compelled to do that, but they didn't do it under Trump, right? They did it under a weak president,
Yeah.
like Biden.
And I think Trump is seeing the bigger picture, right? Like, I mean, he has said that this could really escalate, right? I mean, this is something that if Ukraine,
And it's also true.
100%, yeah, that's what, like he's looking down the line and he's saying like Russia tiene su poder, they have their power. Like let's recognize this isn't two kids fighting. This is one of the bullies in the yard, right at the jail home, who at the jail that has power, who they have their weapons, they have their infrastructure. So I think Trump is really looking down the line and he's saying, Zelensky, there has to be a negotiation of peace. To steal one of your quotes, which I forget who you stole it from, but it's, you can't arrive at peace with only meeting with your friends.
That's right. Shimon Peres.
Shimon Peres.
Of Israel. Trump gets slammed because he wants to bring Russia to the table, have relations with Russia. Well, how do you think you arrive at peace? But just by talking to the Ukraine, that you're not going to get there, right? You need to bring both sides together. And they've indicated that Russia has signaled that they do want to arrive at peace, to negotiate terms of peace. Now, will either side be happy at the end of the negotiations? Hell no. Nobody is ever happy when you have to negotiate terms, right? Because you have to give up something to get something, for the greater good, so you can move forward. So both sides are going to have to lose something. And they're not going to be happy, but you'll have peace. Now, what happens after that, I guess, is really the issue, right? How do we sustain that peace? What we need to do then is arm the Ukraine to the teeth, where they can defend themselves. They remain neutral. They will not be part of NATO, as Trump is saying, but you are going to be able to defend yourself, right? And so an armed neutrality is the answer for the Ukraine, not what anybody else is proposing. That's what the U.S. is proposing under Trump, and I agree with him 100%. He's the one person who can take us towards peace, but everybody else is wants to continue this and prolong this insane war that's become a quagmire, right? Where lives are being lost, cities are being destroyed, institutions are falling, and everybody remains at risk here of escalation. So just stop this, right? But just to me, I think at the end of the day, the irony that this was the man that was going to send us into World War III, and he's the only one who's trying to stop us from going to World War III.
And I was being criticized for it. Well, look, it's a situation that's going to continue to evolve. More news is going to come out of it, so we'll continue to talk the topic as it continues to develop. But bringing it back to a little bit of a mixture of domestic but also international issues is the conversation around tariffs and immigration. You talked about this earlier, that there was a report that immigration or illegal crossings or apprehensions has fallen to approximately 8,500 when you compare the same time in previous years. You're looking at about, in 2022, I think it was 166,000 of those crossings or apprehensions. I mean, the drop of that is significant. And it obviously has to do with the Trump administration. And a lot of it also, I think these things go hand in hand. Tariffs, right? There's the argument that tariffs aren't the best tool because of the economic impact that they can have. But also we've seen how now Mexico, La Presidenta de Mexico, has sent troops to her own border with the United States to help stop not only the traffic of drugs, but the traffic of humans as well. In your opinion, where do you see this kind of this going? Does Trump continue to lean into tariffs? Will this have a negative economic impact? What does Mexico do in all this? Trump this week announced that he will continue with the tariffs that he had announced originally.
Yeah, it's tough to say because this is still playing out in real time. Obviously they just now imposed the tariffs on both Mexico and Canada and China. China 10% more than it was already being charged. Now, of course, the response has been from Mexico that they're going to now increase tariffs in sort of a punitive fashion against what the
Yeah.
U.S. is doing.
Mexico seems to really be in the president Sheinbaum
Yeah,
really seems to be standing strong in the sense that, well, one, she has conceded, like I mentioned earlier, troops to the border, has allowed the U.S. to, I believe, with drones and technology in that area. But she also has said, she gave this speech that apparently that the U.S. should be careful to understand that Latin America, that Mexico, also is a consumer of, she mentioned the iPhone, she mentioned of technology. She's like, we can make the switch. She says we can stop buying Ford, we can stop buying Chevys, we can stop buying iPhones. Like Latin America, she kind of made a call to the rest of Latin America to unite. She's saying there's also a big giant. I think, if I'm not mistaken, she mentioned China, who is eager to do business with us. So it sounds like she's both kind of trying to work with the president in certain areas, but really standing strong. Her approval rating, it is 89%, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's really
And again, I didn't analyze this poll de pie a cabeza. This is just sort of, I'm just reading the headlines here. But I mean, where do you think, like you said, this is still playing out, but it's interesting to see the president of Mexico really saying, do you think she's only going to be able to sustain that for so long? Like, I mean, how real is it that everyone in Mexico is going to switch from an iPhone to Chinese technology, right? That no one's going to buy a Ford or a Chevy
A lot of it's
any
coming
longer.
from the political pressure internally. Ricardo Anaya, who is the leader of the PAN party, is basically accusing her of not doing enough and just throwing out rhetoric, right? It's like, oh, we're a sovereign nation and we're a nation of dignified people, proud people. Stop with that. Just we need action, right? What are you doing to counter or to mitigate the damage, the economic damage that is going to be unleashed because of the tariffs, right? Instead of just flowery rhetoric, about your sovereignty, and she repeats the issue of sovereignty so much as if it covers so many sins. The fact is, Wadi, there is a proven, certifiable connection between the cartels and the Morena party, of which Sheinbaum is a part of. There's been money laundering, there's been corrupt connections that are direct, that are, like I said, verifiable, and they need to stop. They need to stop giving cover to the cartels. But Trump wasn't convinced that she had been doing enough, which is why he imposed the tariffs, because the traffic of fentanyl continues. There's not enough being done to stop the flow, right? And I almost think like she's going to ask for her 29 narcos back. The ones that were expedited. Because, well, you now that you're imposing the tariff, we want our cartel guys back. So you could tell she was doing some cosmetic stuff to try to convince him, put on a little dog and pony show that we are doing something to stop the flow, or at least to interdict a lot of these drugs and what's happening. But now she's, of course, blaming the U.S. consumers as the ones at fault here, because they're the ones that are driving the pull factor of these cartels and the narco traffic, which I think is a mistake, right? So you're not, again, like Ukraine, you're not in a position to excuse away the fact that Mexico is corrupt to the teeth, and drug money, they're swimming in it. The governors of some of the states have famously been arrested or are going through some kind of adjudication of their cases because they've been busted, right? They're taking money from the cartel bosses, and entire regions are controlled by the cartels. And so until that stops, now a tariff is a tax on the consumer. There's no doubt about it. And the ones who are going to suffer are U.S. consumers, who are now going to have to pay a higher price for the products and and services that are coming from Canada and China and Mexico and other parts. Now, this is going to be a hit on the American consumer. Now, by cutting spending and these reductions and increasing productivity and labor participation, they hope to offset that. in the short term. But I don't know. I don't know if you're going to find that equilibrium. I think there's going to be short-term pain that Trump is going to have to explain away. But if we hurt, Mexicans are going to hurt 20 times more.
Se siente en Latinoamérica.
Oh, yeah, because están mucho más dependizados de los Estados Unidos que nosotros de Mexico, right? You know, they need us more than we need them, you know, their products and services. I mean, we buy a lot of stuff from them. Chemicals, car parts, appliances, the vegetables,
food, agriculture.
Food, you know, across the board. All that, of course, because now it's more expensive. There's some companies like Honda has said that they are not gonna, build their
Civic
cars
hybrid
in the U.S.
model.
Yeah, they're gonna build their cars in the U.S. because it's not gotten too expensive because of the tariffs, and so Mexico's gonna hurt. There's no question that they are going to face a massive reaction because of the tariffs, and that's when I think Sheinbaum, she's gonna learn a hard lesson. That I think she needs to be much more accommodating to what Trump is asking for than she has been. Instead of just this sort of cosmetic movement of, military here and there. No, I think you're going to disassociate from the cartels entirely.
Yeah. You kind of started your answer by saying, I don't fully know because we're living it. Yeah. And I think that could be the answer to almost everything that we talked about today when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to the presidents. We're all living in it. It's so fast-paced. Yeah. What a time to be alive, como dicen. We're going to continue to analyze here on Garza Gaitan and the game, play-by-play, what's going on in politics. So make sure that everyone watching, stay tuned. Spotify, Instagram, X, TikTok, across the board. Watch the small clips, but also tune in to the long-form video. Dan, it's great to have you here in Miami. Man. I'm sure it won't be the last time.
Nope, hopefully not. Nope, I always love being here, buddy. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody.